They were buying and selling children from Mexico, from Florida, and from other countries in Latin America, like Paraguay and El Salvador.
I was documenting arms trafficking inside a prison in Colombia at the time. And they kidnapped me, tortured me, and 3 of them raped me.
Kidnapped, beaten, and tortured for 20 straight hours. Yet what this woman did left her captors stunned.
Tiendo estar bien. Yo estaba bien. Yo tengo muchos problemas de salud como consecuencia de todo el trabajo.
She refused to be silenced, armed with nothing but her pen and a defiance that burned brighter than their torture. She came back swinging, exposing powerful cartels and dragging entire empires to their knees. But her story is just one in a line of many. What drove them? Rage? Revenge? Or a relentless need to dismantle a broken system? Join us as we uncover 8 times the cartels messed with the wrong influencers and got burned. Lydia Cacho. So what happens when a journalist decides to poke the devil in the chest and then publish the receipts? Well, ask Lydia Cacho. She wasn't just writing headlines, she was walking the back streets of Cancun, Mexico, knee-deep in cartel country, documenting the unspeakable. And then came December 16th, 2005, the day the story turned personal. She got to her car. That's when they grabbed her. The police, I mean, handcuffed and thrown into the vehicle. Officially, she was being taken into custody. Unofficially, she was about to enter a nightmare no human deserves. What happened next wasn't law enforcement. It was something darker. For the next 20-plus hours, Cacho endured the kind of torment that could break the most seasoned cartel enforcer. They mocked her, threatened to rape her. One officer pulled a gun, aimed it. She was molested, humiliated, dehumanized, all while shackled. This was about something more than justice. It was about fear, about power, about silencing the one woman who had dared to say the quiet part out loud. Because 6 months earlier, Cacho had done the unthinkable. She'd published The Demons of Eden, a book so explosive, most journalists in Mexico wouldn't have dared whisper its premise, let alone put it in print. But Cacho wasn't most journalists. She named names, governors, senators, businessmen, big ones, the kind who shook hands with presidents in public, then trafficked children in the shadows. The book shattered illusions. Citizens read it, so did the world. And the picture it painted wasn't abstract. It was horrifying. A network of sexual predators protected by money, politics, and bullets. And in retaliation, the government didn't deny it. They didn't sue for libel. They came for her. But Cacho? She wasn't new to survival. Back in 1999, she was raped in a bus station restroom. Her attacker broke bones, left her bloody, violated, and abandoned. That kind of trauma silences most people, not Cacho. She healed, she wrote, and then she fired back, in ink. She took aim at Mexico's darkest corners and dragged them into the light. And she didn't miss. But victory had its price. After surviving the torture, they locked her up again, this time in a prison in Puebla. The charge? Defamation. But when the time came to testify, she stood her ground for 7 brutal hours, not just for herself, but for every mother, daughter, survivor whose voice had been stolen. She pointed at the men who tried to break her. Then she broke them instead. But that didn't buy her peace, not even close. Even after winning in court, safety vanished. She was tracked, followed, almost assassinated 7 times. Still, she kept writing. Still, she kept naming names. Still, she kept surviving. And then came the summer of 2019. A group of armed men broke into her home. They killed her dogs, trashed everything. They were looking for her, but she wasn't there. she had already fled. Exile became her new normal. But silence? Never. From abroad, Cacho kept publishing. More books like Slavery, Inc. and The Sorrows of Mexico rolled out. More truth, more names, no fear, no backing down. The threats kept coming, but so did the awards. International acclaim followed. In 2010, she was named a World Press Freedom Hero by the International Press Institute. She became a global voice, an icon, with nearly 200,000 followers. And in a country where over 100 media workers have been murdered since 2000, that voice was louder than ever. Lydia Cacho didn't just report the truth, she embodied it. She didn't just survive, she fought, she exposed, and she won. But for every Lydia, there's another journalist, one whose voice was trapped in silence for nearly a decade, until justice finally caught up. Jineth Bedoya Lima. On May 25, 2000, Claudia Julieta Bedoya believed she was ready for whatever came next. At 26, she was no stranger to threats. In her world, danger wasn't just possible, it was routine. As a journalist in Bogotá, working alongside Ignacio Gomez at El Espectador, Bedoya wasn't just building a career. She was uncovering the kinds of stories that didn't just rattle cages. They blew doors wide open. Her reporting had begun digging into the dirty underworld of arms trafficking, involving state officials and the far-right paramilitary group known as the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, or AUC. And it wasn't fiction. It was names, roots, deals, the truth, basically. In search of more answers, Bedoya arranged an interview with a paramilitary leader known only as the Baker, housed inside Bogotá's notorious La Modelo prison. She wasn't reckless. She took precautions. To minimize risk, she brought along an editor and a staff photographer. Every move was calculated, every precaution taken. But sometimes, all it takes is a second. As they waited outside for clearance, the group became briefly separated. In that single, fleeting moment, she vanished. 3 men took her, drugged her, and forced her into a vehicle. And from there, the violence began. We're talking both physical and psychological. She was driven far from Bogotá to a location hours away, where they tortured her, raped her, and made their message unmistakably clear. This wasn't personal, it was professional. Her body was the billboard. The message? Stay silent, or this happens to you, which very clearly was passed to the entire Colombia press. When they were done, they dumped her in a pile of roadside garbage, bruised, bleeding, and broken, but not erased. Somehow, she crawled her way to a road, where a taxi driver found her, still alive. But the scars, visible and invisible, would remain, and so would the silence. For over a decade, the case was shelved, blocked, and forgotten. Until May 2011, when a paramilitary soldier was finally arrested and confessed to being one of the 3 men who had abducted her. But even then, most assumed she'd fade out of journalism, that the trauma would shut the door for good. They were wrong. A year after the assault, she joined El Tiempo, Colombia's largest newspaper. And this time, she went deeper. More stories about paramilitaries. More red lines crossed. In August 2003, she traveled to Puerto Alvira to report on how FARC rebels had taken control of a village, forcing more than 1,000 people into cocaine production. But her arrival didn't go unnoticed. The rebels captured her team, stripped them of their clothes and gear, and left them in total isolation with no food, contact, or exit plan. They were expected to starve, forgotten by the outside world. And yet again, survival came from an unlikely source. Women in the town risked everything to feed the journalists in secret. After multiple failed attempts by the townspeople to alert the Red Cross, Bedoya and her team were eventually released. She didn't slow down after that. She couldn't. Bedoya became a household name, a beacon, a living, breathing defiance against the machinery of violence and silence. Her reporting pierced through cartel shadows and state corruption, sparking conversations that once only lived in whispers. While Bedoya became the face of fearless resistance, the next influencer on our list chose a different path. Quiet, faceless, but just as dangerous to those who feared the truth. Blog del Narco. They say if you want to stay alive in cartel country, you keep your head down and your name off the record. Well, that's how Blog del Narco website was born. Back in 2010, something shifted in Mexico. Drug wars weren't just headlines anymore, they were spilling into the streets. Monterrey, once a quiet, safe city, turned into a war zone overnight. Narco blockades, shootouts in broad daylight, a gubernatorial candidate assassinated like it was nothing. The border cities of Camargo and Mir emptied out, reduced to ghost towns. People stopped feeling safe. And the press? They stopped talking. Could you blame them? In just 2 months, 8 journalists were kidnapped in Reynosa. Families were threatened. Friends disappeared. Reporters folded. Newsrooms went dark. Silence replaced the evening news. But then something appeared in that silence. An anonymous blog. Blog del Narco hit the internet in March 2010, and it didn't ask permission. No filters, no edits. Just raw, brutal footage. Executions, gunfights, messages from the cartels themselves, uploaded by people too scared to show their face, but too furious to stay quiet. And people listened. Within months, Blog del Narco exploded. 3 million visitors a month. It wasn't just a website, it was a lifeline. A way to see what no one else would show. But it also made enemies. Big ones. The cartels weren't happy. They tried to end the blog the way they ended everything else. Brutally. First came the cyber attacks, hundreds of them. Then came the rumors, the blogs working with this cartel. No, that one. Then it got darker. In 2011, the site was hit hard, knocked offline by a massive cyber attack. Days passed. Then it came back on new servers. But the cartels weren't having it. They sent a crystal clear message. Bodies started turning up. A man and a woman, strangled, hung from a bridge in Nuevo Laredo. A sign flapping beside them in the breeze. This is what happens to internet snitches. We're watching. Los Zetas. It was no longer just about censorship. It was psychological warfare. The cartels weren't just silencing voices, they were sending messages in blood. And yet, Blog del Narco kept going. While traditional media crumbled under fear, the blog grew stronger, too big to bury. By 2013, even international outlets started using it. Authorities turned to it for tips, for footage, for leads. But the pressure never let up. If anything, it got worse. Then something changed. Posts slowed down. Updates came less often. People started whispering again. One rumor stood out, that a young woman in her early 20s who goes by the alias Lucy was one of the authors. But no name, no face, just a shadow with a keyboard standing against giants. And to this day, nobody knows who runs it. But someone still does, quietly, carefully, watching the watchers. Peso Pluma. Fame, money, and a voice that cut across borders like a blade through silk. That was the power of Peso Pluma. With over 15 million Instagram followers and 7 million on TikTok, he wasn't just an artist, he was a phenomenon. The most watched musician on YouTube in the US in 2023.
Last year, you were YouTube's most streamed artist. YouTube's most streamed artist. That's you.
A name buzzing through every corner of Mexico. But underneath the flashing lights and screaming fans was a darker undertone, one Peso himself wrote into his lyrics. He didn't sing about love or heartbreak. He sang about diamond-studded pistols, cocaine runs, and sending enemies straight to the cemetery. His music glorified a world soaked in blood, the drug trade. And while it earned him millions of followers, it also earned him something far more dangerous: attention, but not the kind you want. Just a week after he lit up the stage at the MTV Bass Music Awards, the warnings came. 3 separate banners, splashed in bold red ink, appeared across Tijuana. Each one aimed at the 24-year-old superstar. One message, chilling in its bluntness, read, "Refrain from appearing this October 14th, because it will be your last presentation." The signature at the bottom, CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of Mexico's most vicious criminal empires, and, more importantly, bitter enemies of the Sinaloa cartel, especially in Tijuana. So why the threats? Well, because Peso made the fatal mistake of choosing a side. In his hit track, Siempre Pendientes, translated as Always Ready, Peso gave a nod to a foot soldier of none other than Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, a Sinaloa man. And this wasn't the first time Peso had praised Sinaloa in his music. But this time, CJNG wasn't looking the other way. This time, they'd had enough. And if there's one thing cartels have made clear, it's what they do to singers who cross the line. In 1992, Chalino Sanchez stood on a stage, read a death threat aloud, and was executed hours later. In 2018, Yossi Locote was killed after featuring a rival cartel in his music video. There's a long list, all of them silenced for choosing the wrong lyrics. Now it was Peso's turn to choose. Unlike those before him, Peso didn't gamble. He didn't test fate. He canceled the show. Fans were outraged, tickets refunded, speculation rampant. But one thing remained intact: his life. And in the cartel world, walking away with your life, that's the biggest win of all. But he wasn't the only one, because there's another name, a rising star with an even riskier story. And like Peso, they were about to face a choice that could cost them everything. Natanael Cano. You ever heard of a song so bold it felt less like music and more like a challenge? That's the sound of Natanael Cano, a young star with over 11 million followers on Instagram and a playlist soaked in the violence of the Mexican underworld. But Cano wasn't just making hits. He was walking straight through cartel territory with a matchstick in hand. He hit the scene in 2018, young, ambitious, and already raising eyebrows. Fame followed fast. Fans adored him. Streams soared. But there's one dangerous illusion that's claimed the lives of artists before him: the belief that popularity makes you bulletproof. That illusion shattered in January 2025. The warning didn't come in whispers. It was written in bold black letters across a banner left out in public view. Dedicate yourselves to what is yours, which is the profession of musicians. This is not because of making corridos. It is for collaborating with money economically and any illegal action. If you do not heed this warning, you will be shot. Signed by Jalisco Matasalas, a brutal faction of the Chapitos, the wing of the Sinaloa cartel run by El Chapo's sons. These weren't idle threats. The Chapitos were infamous for their torture techniques: electrocution, corkscrews, even feeding victims to tigers, dead or alive. Most artists would have gone quiet. Peso Pluma did. But Cano, he clapped back. He posted a photo to Instagram, blankets with his face printed on them. The caption: "The only mantitas I'm worried about right now. Will they keep me warm?" The background track, his own defiant anthem, AFS, a song laced with nods to organized crime. The post didn't last long, but the message was already out there. Natanael Cano wasn't flinching. After all, he wasn't the only artist threatened. Other artists were feeling the heat too. Names like Tito Torbellino J and Javier Rosas. Suddenly, the tension wasn't just between lyrics and listeners. It was between singers and the Sinaloa cartel. The threat level had escalated so quickly that the Mexican government had to intervene, offering Cano official protection. So what set this firestorm off? It traced back to one major spark: the kidnapping of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, a kingpin whose disappearance shattered the balance inside the Sinaloa cartel. Factions turned on each other, rivalries exploded, and in the chaos, the Chapitos zeroed in on anyone they saw as disloyal. Even musicians. The aftermath was pure horror. Bodies were left in cars, dumped with pizza boxes stabbed into them. The streets of Sinaloa became something else entirely. A graveyard dressed in symbolism, where pizza and party hats weren't food or fun anymore. They were signatures of slaughter. Annabelle Hernandez. At just 21, Annabelle Hernandez made a choice. Not for glory, not for fame, but to change the world. What she didn't realize then was that this choice would drag her into the dark machinery of Mexico's corruption. She didn't start her journalism career chasing celebrities or covering red carpets. No, her very first cover story, back in 1993, tore into Mexico's rigged elections. And that was just the beginning. Annabelle found her voice in the pages of investigative journalism. She chased truth like it owed her something. After 5 grueling years of research, in 2010, she released Los Señores del Narco, a bombshell book translated as Narcoland. It named names, cartel bosses, politicians, police commanders. No euphemisms, no filters, just the raw, ugly truth. The book sold over 1,000 copies. But the reaction, that was the real story. The threats started almost immediately. Men began tailing her children from school. Strangers loitered outside her home. Her mailbox filled with warnings. But it all came to a head on December 21st. 10 armed men stormed into her home in Mexico State. Her government-assigned bodyguard was briefly taken. Neighbors later said the attackers first claimed to be from the Zetas cartel, then changed their story and said they were federal agents. Did it really matter? The message was unmistakable. We're watching you. Luckily, Annabelle wasn't home that night. But the house she returned to? It wasn't hers anymore. Dead animals left on her doorstep. Threats that now extended to her family. Her words had cut too deep, piercing both cartel bosses and corrupt officials. And for that, she was marked. Yes, she won awards. National, global, honors stacked like trophies. But the real symbol of her impact? She now lives under permanent protection. 2 armed security guards, 24 hours a day. Eventually, even that wasn't enough. She made the hardest decision of her life. She went into exile, left behind the country she had spent decades trying to fix. Not because she gave up, but because survival demanded it. So, where does that fire come from? Why keep risking it all? It goes back to one call. December 5th, 2000. Annabelle's mother was on the line. Her father hadn't come home. Hours later, they found his body. No investigation, no arrests, no justice. His death was treated like a whisper. That silence, it haunted her. It shaped her. It became her reason. Annabelle Hernandez never set out to be a hero. She just wanted the truth. But in a country where telling it can cost you your life, she became one anyway. Gustavo Gorriti. In the early hours of April 6, 1992, a team of Peruvian army commandos stormed into Gustavo Gorriti's home. No warrant, no warning. They grabbed him, snatched his computers, and whisked him away to a black site run by the National Intelligence Service, Pentagonito. For 2 days, he vanished. Panic began to spread. His family, friends, colleagues all searched, but no answers came. Then, out of nowhere, Gorriti was released. No explanation, just a quiet warning. Back off, you're getting too close. So, who was he? Why did a government treat him like a threat? Gorriti wasn't a soldier, not a spy, not even a politician. He was a journalist, but not just any journalist. He was the kind that made presidents sweat and generals lose sleep. For years, he dug deep into the darkest corners of Peru's underbelly. Cartels, crooked politicians, dirty money. And when he published, he came with receipts, bank records, leaked tapes, classified documents. One expose in particular rattled the whole system. Just before his abduction, Gorriti published a damning piece on President Alberto Fujimori's right-hand man, Vladimiro Montesinos. On the surface, Montesinos looked like a mild-mannered advisor. But behind the curtain, he was engineering secret arms deals, running spy networks, cutting favors for traffickers, and blackmailing the press. Gorriti caught him with proof. Montesinos struck back, hard. But it wasn't enough to shut him up. After his release, Gorriti knew his days were numbered, so he fled into exile. He landed in Panama, took a new post with an international news agency, and kept digging. What he found? Even worse. A quiet campaign donation of $51,000 traced straight to Colombian drug cartels. That money flowed right into the president's pockets. The government didn't like that, so they denied his visa renewal, tried to force him out, but human rights advocates stepped in. Gorriti stayed, and the backlash began. Threats, lawsuits, online smear campaigns, protesters hurled flares, and even human waste at his office. On TV, he was called a traitor. Online, a criminal sympathizer. Why? Because he exposed the rot they wanted buried. Even in 2024, Peru's government turned their sights on him instead of going after the corrupt. They demanded access to his phone logs, messages, and his sources. But Gorriti said no. Until today, Gorriti is still documenting the truth, fighting for justice, and putting corrupt officials in their place. Dileia Ceroa. What would you do if your brother vanished and no one even flinched? That was Dileia Ceroa's reality. In a country drowning in cartel violence, where over 100,000 people have disappeared, her brother became just another face lost in the crowd. Another unsolved case. Another silence. But Dileia refused to become another grieving statistic. While the world in 2023 was busy painting itself pink with Barbie premieres and themed mall displays, Dileia launched something entirely different. Barbie Buscadora, the searcher Barbie. No heels, no handbags. This Barbie wore cargo pants, carried search tools, and clutched the photograph of a missing loved one. It wasn't a PR stunt. It wasn't for likes or fame. It was a scream, packaged in plastic, for a country that had stopped listening. If the government wouldn't act, and the police wouldn't care, Dileia knew who still held power in Mexico: the cartels. So she aimed her message at them. Not the courts, not the politicians. The men who ruled in shadows. It was bold, risky, deadly even. Speaking out against cartels in Mexico is often a death sentence. Activists have disappeared for whispering less. But Dileia didn't care. Within hours, her message went viral. Across cities and villages, thousands of women, mothers, sisters, wives, saw her, understood her, joined her. These were women who spent weekends walking scorched earth with their bare hands, digging through forgotten fields, hoping for bones, for buttons, for anything. They dug where law enforcement refused to look. They kept faith where the system had given up. And now, someone had spoken, loud enough for them all to be heard. But not everyone applauded. Some said she was glorifying the violence. Others said turning a national tragedy into a doll was tasteless. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.